All right, guys. Hi. So I spent like a long time right before we actually got started saying, what was it that I wanted to talk about this week? And I remember, but I don't even know if we're going to talk about it this week. So like, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But we ended last week. Why it seems a little bit different today? So last week we stopped at the end of Hebrews 1. And so now we are going to be approaching like Hebrews 2. Now, Hebrews is fairly long and very detailed, and we're talking about like the certain like the title of last week's was Coalescing Threads. And we can see like how the threads are coming together in this book particularly because this is written to people who would have known a lot of the material. And so anyway, so without any further ado, let's go ahead and crack it open at Hebrews 2, and we'll just keep going. So, so we must listen very carefully to the truth we have heard, or we may drift away from it. This is, okay. I think it's easy enough to comprehend in English-speaking culture as well. I mean, it's like very, very, very. It's like we often talk about like shepherd imagery. We often talk about like say like you're in a dark place and it's like almost like the Marco Polo type of a thing, like where like you speak and it's like you follow the voice. But here I do also believe that it's really referencing the listen to his voice and not the voice of anything else. And that goes all the way back to Genesis. Once again, like when we're talking about like the whole, like where it's like Adam listened to Eve's voice, and that was like it's like always the way to stay on the narrow path is by listening or heeding God's voice and the voice of no one else. And so that's the like. Kind of like listen and obey, because there's no other way. It's like that. How's the word? Trust and obey. Wow. I'm terrible at that. That's the second time I missed that now. Anyway, so the message God delivered through angels has always stood firm, and every violation of the law and every act of disobedience was punished. I'm gonna say something. It's funny because it's like, okay, God delivered the message that God delivered through angels has always stood firm. We already know, like from our studies, that that's not how we would say that. And it's what I'm saying is like I'm talking about from a modern perspective. Looking back, it's like how God's God's message has always stood firm. It's funny because it's like when you think of it from that type of infallibility type of mentality, we've already encountered issues with how firm this word has stood. What I'm saying is like. We were talking before about roasting the meat, boiling the meat, and then like how Josiah actually roasted and boiled the meat in order to like accommodate like all the code of the Torah. Or the thing before about like how there are slight inconsistencies between Genesis 1 and 2. So that's what I'm saying is like when we, from our perspective, it doesn't necessarily seem so, but I totally see what was going through there. I think I'm probably beating a dead horse, but I think it's good that this horse is being beaten right now. Terrible thing to say, but you get where I'm going at. So anyway, so what makes us think we can escape if we ignore this great salvation that was first announced by the Lord Jesus himself and then delivered to us by those who heard him speak? It's funny. And God confirmed the message by giving signs and wonders and various miracles and gifts of the Holy Spirit whenever he chose. So this is like that. So basically what Hebrews is doing is just taking like the whole story of the Old Testament and like really putting it into focus. You know that. So now to Jesus, talking about him being a human. And furthermore, it is not angels who will control the future world we are talking about. For in one place, the scriptures say, what are mere mortals that you should think about them, or a son of man that you should care for him? Yet for a little while you made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You gave them authority over all things. Now, it's funny because, like, we did talk about this psalm before, actually. It's Psalm 8, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Psalm 8.
Yeah, it's Psalm 8. And it's like, it's funny because you made them a little bit lower than the angels. All it says is, like, of the Elohim, right? And it's funny because I do want to bring this up because this is important. What is the Gnostic principle of the demiurge or the Gnostic idea of the Logos? I'm just reiterating. So does anyone remember the demiurge / Logos and what relationship that thing had to God? If anyone remembers.
I'm not sure. No.
Okay. To repeat, and I think, and the reason why I think it's good to repeat this is to understand some of the context of things. You got God on high. You have the demiurge / Logos, and then you have humanity. So, what do you remember?
Yeah, but I'm not sure where.
What is the relationship of the demiurge to God? Is it the same as God? Is it the same as God, like the great God? What?
No.
No. Right. You got it. Right. So what is the Gnostic principle?
I'm not up on my Gnostic stuff, so I'm not sure.
I'm trying to pull it out. I'm really trying to pull this information out right now. So, because I think it's important to remember this so that when we encounter anti-Gnostic stuff in Scripture, we can recognize it like that. So what is the demiurge in comparison? It's also called the Logos. What is that in relation to God based on Gnostic principle? Not John.
It was the lesser Elohim.
Yeah, exactly. Was it always good?
No.
No. And what did it rule the earth?
Yeah, wasn't it a secondary, kind of like a Baal thing?
It wouldn't even say Baal. It was just a secondary being. It was just second. It wasn't as great as the great God. So it's like it's just more like a thing that kind of did God's bidding, but it also like did some evil things. And there's a split. Some thought it was only good. Some thought it was only evil, and then some thought it was some of both. But the demiurge / Logos was considered the ruler of the world. And this is where, so when you died, you would transcend the demiurge if you had found the light that was in you. And so when you had like tapped into the spark of God's light in you, then you would be able to transcend the demiurge and go beyond the realm that the demiurge had control over. Be it a good demiurge, an evil demiurge, or kind of like both. Like the whole concept is you go past the demiurge to join God. And so this is clearly anti-Gnostic in the way it's being said here, because the demiurge was also, in a way, like you said, Mom, like equated to like an angelic force. I guess you could also say like Baal, like what Dad was saying, but so they were making reference back to the Elohim. Yeah, like I can see that. So I'm going to take a look at this section again. So back in verse 5 where it says, and furthermore, it is not angels, Elohim, however you say it. It is not angels who will control the future world we are talking about. And so for in one place, the scriptures say, what are mere mortals that you should think about them, or a son of man that you should care for him? Yet for a little while you made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. You gave them authority over all things. That is very much against the Gnostic conception of things. Now, when it says all things, it means nothing is left out. But we have not seen all things put under their authority. What we do see is Jesus, who for a little while was given a position a little lower than the angels. And because he suffered death for us, he is now crowned with glory and honor. Yes, by God's grace, Jesus tasted death for everyone. God, for whom and through whom everything was made, chose to bring many children into glory, and it was only right that he should make Jesus, through his suffering, a perfect leader, fit to bring them into their salvation. So, to repeat, when it comes to, so the Gnostic concept of Judaism began about around the same time as Jesus, through Philo, who came from the school that was in Alexandria, right? And so so he was saying things like, he was comparing the Logos, the angel of the Lord. He was comparing the angel of the Lord to the Logos, or the demiurge of Plato. And so what this text is doing right now is basically contrasting it, saying, no, this is actually more along the line, this is completely anti-Gnostic, like in the way that it's worded here. The reason is, our reason for this is, or a way to see it is, how do I even put this in? Okay, so Jesus, if Jesus were the Logos, then it was like it wasn't necessarily through the Logos that you attained salvation. And it wasn't because of the destruction of the Logos that you attained it either. It's like you could transcend it on your own. That Jesus' death wasn't necessarily necessary. Not to mention, the Gnostics also believed that he didn't really have a physical body, and that he died like a genuine, painful death. And so when you're looking at this, this is saying that, no, Christ suffered, Christ died, but as part of his death, he was crowned with the greatest glory. And remember that the demiurge is secondary. And it's no, he's not secondary, he's prime here. And so I think it's just important to see that this is, because Judaism was definitely affected, very heavily affected by Philo's thinking. And so I think it's good to also look at this text that is written to the Hebrews, having very anti-Gnostic thoughts in here. I think it's very important to notice that. So, and not to mention too that regardless of the Philo's influence on this, regardless of that, not to mention that a lot of Jewish people were having problems comprehending that that God had a son who was human, that was born through a virgin and all that. We were talking a bit about this last week, but I think it's good to reiterate that as well. So it's it's kind of on two fronts where this book is really this letter is really hammering home the core concept of God's grace to his people. But anyway. So starting in verse 11. So now Jesus and the ones he makes holy have become have the same Father. That is why Jesus is not ashamed to call them his brothers and sisters. For he said to God, I will proclaim your name to my brothers and sisters. I will praise you among your assembled people. He also said, I will put my trust in him. That is, I and the children God has given me. So, anyway, because God's children are human beings made of flesh and blood, the Son also became flesh. This is huge. And blood. For only as a human being could he die, and only by dying could he break the power of the devil, who has the power of death. Only in this way could he set free all who have lived their lives as slaves to the fear of dying. We also know that the Son did not come to help angels. He came to help the descendants of Abraham. Therefore, it was necessary for him to be made in every respect like us. And it's funny because it's like when you look at the demiurge concept, it's like the demiurge is not human, and humans are not the demiurge. It's like that's a very key point. His brothers and sisters, so that he could be our merciful and faithful high priest before God. Then he could offer a sacrifice that would take away the sins of the people. That's another thing I wanted to mention today. Then he could offer a sacrifice that would take away the sins of the people. Since he himself has gone through suffering and testing, he is able to help us when we are being tested. Hold on one second. There was something about the high priest I wanted to mention. It's huge. High priest. Hold on. Was it through a conversation with you, Dad, that we were talking about the high priest and the sacrifice and stuff like that this past week?
I don't think so. Not this week.
No, it was through my Hebrew school. Hold on one second. I have it here. Okay, here it is. Okay. This is, talking about high priest stuff, I did want to share this, and that's one of the things I did want to talk about. What do we know about cities of refuge? Anything that you know about cities of refuge, please just throw it in.
Cities of refuge throughout the, I think they started with 3 of them. And if somebody accidentally killed somebody, like with an axe that fell off their handle, they were to flee to the city of refuge. But if the Avenger of Blood caught him before he got there, he was allowed to kill him. But if he got there before the Avenger of Blood, then he was safe, and he would appear before the local magistrates or the city elders or whatever, and they would try him. And if it was found that it was an innocent thing, he had to stay in the city of refuge until the Jubilee. Or either the Jubilee or to the changing of the high priest. I forget which one. But yeah, and then the idea was with the high priest?
Yep.
Yep, that makes sense.
And the idea was what?
To not inadvertently kill somebody who did it, who murdered or killed somebody accidentally. And it was basically for basically social justice, or just, to keep things, to keep things equitable, and not to have somebody just out of a fierce anger and revenge go kill somebody when it was an accident, as opposed to a pre-planned murder.
True. However, murder is still murder.
Well, yeah, but if it was a planned murder, then they would try him.
Right. No, this is really cool. I'm pulling the answer out of you. So, this is fun.
Those are assumptions. Of course, if he was guilty, then and it was premeditated, then he should be. He was to be executed.
But even if it were an accident, I mean, it's interesting that it still has to be atoned for.
Oh, yeah. That was, probably the...
And let's take a look real quick. Numbers 35-31. It says, also, you must never accept a ransom payment for the life of someone judged guilty of murder and subject to execution. Murderers must always be put to death. And never accept a ransom payment from someone who has fled to a city of refuge, allowing a slayer to return to his property before the death of the high priest. This will ensure that the land where you live will not be polluted, for murder pollutes the land. Remember, like we were talking about, like Cain and Abel, and when like the blood spilled out and it polluted, and it's like, and that's why God said, "I hear the screaming of the blood that's in the ground." And so this is a similar idea. And so anyway, to continue on from where I left off there, and no sacrifice except the execution of the murderer can purify the land from murder. You must not defile the land where you live, for I live there myself. I am the Lord who lives among the people of Israel. I think this is a really cool section here because I never saw it this way before. So, but it goes, wait a second, so you can't, so no sacrifice except the execution of the murderer, but when the high priest dies, even the unintentional murderer is allowed to return.
Right.
So it's
but
interesting
there's a difference though, Joel, between killing somebody accidentally and murdering somebody. Murder assumes.
But both are considered murderers in Hebrew.
Is it just one word? They don't have kill versus murder, or what? I don't know.
There's many ways to say kill and stuff like that. So the problem is, wait, let me bring up the interlinear. This is fun. Okay, number 35, 30.
Speak for yourself.
What?
I said speak for yourself about being fun.
Did I say not fun?
You said, this is fun. I'm joking with you, Jill.
Oh, okay. Speak for yourself. Okay, sorry. Yeah, like it took me a second. I'm like, my brain's a little bit scattered today. But all right. Okay, let's take a look. So, we'll see ya. Okay, so that's a murder. We'll see ya. Okay, so all it just says is the person who fled. But see? So blood defiles it, right? And the land, no atonement can be made for blood that is shed, that falls upon it. Now remember, tying back into like the whole Elijah thing when he's like making fun of Baal and they're cutting themselves and pouring and shedding their blood onto the ground. It's interesting there. So, by the blood of him, so the only atonement is to return blood that has been shed with the blood of the one who shed it. That's it.
Right.
Like, if someone has shed blood, then the only atonement is the blood of the one who shed it. Except the one who did it unintentionally can return upon the death of the high priest. Israel. And that's it. Fathers and families and sons. Okay, let's take a look real quick. I want to see something. So that was 34. Okay, so we're looking at slayer, right? Let's see if it's the same word in verse 26. The same word. It's exactly the same word. So if you want to take a look here, notice the R, the S with the dot, and the H with the dot. Okay? So when it was talking about murderer in 31, so this is in verse 26 when it says, if the person who has been at the city of refuge leaves it, right? But if you go to verse 31, the generic word for murderer,
manslayer.
R, S with a dot, A with a dot, H with a dot. The same word. Now, this is definitely going back into something. I was actually I had a lot of conversations recently actually about this, but it's been something that's been on my mind for a while. And I don't see anywhere, like at all, in any way, shape, or form, that it is good for human life to be taken by a Christian, right? Like again, like, and the Bible does absolutely recognize mistakes, like or errors, or but never does it really say though, like in these terms, that that the taking of someone else's life is ever good, and it is sad to hear the opposite spoken at churches. And it's like, oh, what about in this situation or in this situation? Like, no, the Bible is clear. It's very clear that any slaying of human life is considered murder, and like any of it. And I think any shedding of blood in that sense.
The avenger of blood wasn't considered a murderer, though.
Yeah, but the avenger, but the thing is that the person who would, so the only thing that could atone for murder is the spilling of the blood of the one who spilled it. So like but no, you're right with that. That's the thing about Israel though. Hold on one second. Yeah, you're right, and I knew that one. But the thing is, it's just like, okay, then if we're taking that extra leap into Christianity, then it's all the more so. Meaning, it just doesn't happen in Christianity. It won't. And I don't think that there's any argument. Like, what I mean is, like, any valid argument to the contrary on this one. And it's a strong opinion of mine, but I think it is one of the most important opinions. Is when it comes to, like, the whole, it's like, well, it like that. Then in whatever situation a person should be put to death, we are not the judges of that one. We are not, and that is something that cannot be in part of Christianity. But too often, I find handguns or rifles or assault rifles put right on top of a Bible for a very specific reason. And it's like there's a lot of nationalist tendencies. And it's like, go ahead and try to take this. I'm going to shoot you if you do. And it's like, wait, there's nothing that is Christian about that. Nothing. And that's a very important thing to hold through. For example, remember when Jesus was talking about, like, with the whole, with the zealots and stuff like that. He never said that the zealots' cause was worth actually killing people over, which they did with Romans. And I think this is something that really does need to be said. However, okay, wait 1 second though. We're talking about, like, the person who accidentally spilled blood. So the only thing that could atone for that, except for the spilling of the one who spilled the blood, would be the death of the high priest. And that is and that would be like it's very similar to the whole, I mean, no, it's actually very parallel to the whole concept of Christ dying for us on the cross. And it's because it's the death of the high priest that allowed the person who innocently shed blood to return. Now, there are concrete differences between the Torah code and what Christians are to follow. We have talked about this ad nauseum when it comes to, okay, if we're going to take a look at, like, the Avenger of Blood here when it comes to if we're going to follow that way, it's like, fine, then let's not mix fabrics. Then let's make sure that we stone people who disrespect. let's go ahead and like that whole we were talking before about like the abortion thing. It's like if someone struck it's in Exodus 21, I think, where it's like if someone struck a pregnant woman and she prematurely gave birth, the person wasn't supposed to be stoned. They were supposed to just be paid compensation. And they were just supposed to pay compensation. It's like, so if we're going to look at that as like the only thing, I think that we have to be careful of that as well. But I think it is very interesting to see that how we're talking about like with murder and stuff like that. And the only thing that could atone for murder in that sense was the death of the high priest, which is really interesting. So any comments on that? I am open for discussion to the contrary as well.
Okay, so what you're saying that the government should not try people who murder people and execute them.
We are not a Christian nation.
I didn't say that. I'm just saying, okay, let's say you happen to be a Christian and you were part of the legal system and you were a judge. You're saying that that's not his prerogative to do that?
There are arguments to the contrary. I have heard the argument of give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but the thing is, though, that is an example of tax law. And it's like, do Christians pay taxes? Are they supposed to? Yes. They're supposed to spend pray for the shalom of whatever place that they live. But when it comes to like actually killing someone in terms of like judgment and stuff like that, especially like when it comes to like, I just have a problem with it. Like it's like we are called to do
before Moses in the the first covenant, the old covenant, after the flood, God gave all humanity the right. He says, if a man kills another man or another person, you should basically avenge the blood. Basically, by men he should also be judged. And I don't think that principle is gone with Christianity, but it needs to be done equitably, honestly, and not in some kangaroo court type of thing. And I think there's extenuating circumstances. You could also put them in jail for life or whatever. But there is a responsibility, I think, living in this life, that there are situations where you have to deal with that kind of thing. You have a madman or something, or a crazy person who just is, a murderer. What are you going to do? Say, well, we'll forgive you this time and let him go do it again?
Let me ask you.
Or if you forget about murdering, how about somebody who's a thief, who's robbing people? Are you supposed to, as a civil
that has nothing to do with murdering someone.
No. I'm saying it's the same principles. You have to have law and order and some kind of.
No. I actually have to bring this one up. Death is the utmost. Like that is like the thing.
Yeah,
if we're talking about thing and stuff like that, that's another thing. And then it goes back to when Christ says, like, if you look at someone the wrong way, like, then that's like equivalent to murder. But like, no, I'm talking about the actual taking of a life from this world, like taking it and choosing that is the right thing to do. That is absolutely a biblical concept. Now, when you go back to like the Avenger of the Blood, that is something that's very pertinent, yes. But think about this, though. Did God avenge Christ's death?
I'm trying to see where you're going with this. Are you saying that we should just allow chaos to continue in the world?
Wait a second. No, the thing is like.
I'm not.
No. We're going down a stream today. All right. Let's think. How many genuine Christians do you know? And let's be honest. Like, how many genuine, actual, will do anything for Christ Christians do you know?
Not many.
Exactly. So do you think that the world will fall into a state of utter? I mean, we always live in chaos. Like humanity's always lived in some sort of chaos, like for thousands of years. But what I'm saying is, it's like how many genuine. We talked before about like the small flock, right? Like when we're talking about like how it's like the first fruit, the first harvest, the first collection. It's not always a great amount. We were let's think about agriculture, right?
It's called a remnant.
Right, exactly. It's very, very, very few, right? So it's like for genuine Christianity, murder is completely off the table. It's like that because it's an example of God's grace. The Father did not avenge his son's death. And it's the same idea for when, like think about like with Nero, he was a madman, right? But society did survive, but a lot of Christians died as well. And but the thing is, though, it's like judges, or like people in government, or things like that. It's like they might spout the Bible, but how Christian are they? And I mean genuinely so. You know what I'm saying with this, and I'm not saying like oh, that person's not Christian or that person. It's like, no, think about it. How many people are willing to use everything for Christ, just as much as he lost everything for us? And that's what I'm talking about in terms of you know what I'm saying. And so that's.
But what
yeah.
I think you're talking about apples and oranges here. You're talking about two different things in that you got the people who are followers of Christ versus civil society, government, whatever, wherever you're from or for. The deal is you have to have some kind of order, and you look in the New Testament,
right.
And Peter and Paul were always talked about, they don't hold the sword in vain. There's consequences to what you do. So I think if you're talking about on a personal level, non-governmental level, there's one thing. But when you're dealing with trying to maintain order in a society, you have to have some sort of rules and guidelines, etc.
That's where the disconnect is. And let me reiterate here. I am never once have I said in the government level. And what I'm talking about is like implying that Christianity should be at that government level. You know what I'm saying? It's like the government has its place. The government does enact a certain sort of civil order. And I think we absolutely, when you say comparing apples and oranges, maybe, because it's like we are definitely on the same page here. I think you might have misunderstood that I was thinking, oh yeah, that's how government should be run. Well, I mean, our government's run, I'm not saying the American government. Please understand me. I'm saying the kingdom's government.
Government in general. I'm talking about human government on this earth as it stands today.
Right.
It's not going to be perfect. It never is. But you need to keep some sort of order. And there's some tyrannical governments, and there's some less tyrannical governments. But the thing is, you can't let it turn into a monkey court, and you can't, like a monkey trial type of thing. And neither can you allow vigilantes to go running around trying to do justice outside the legal system. I'm not saying our legal system is the best in the world, but it's better than some and not as good as others, probably.
I can understand the human aspect of that. But I think the way that I've personally been looking at it recently is like, what am I going to do about it anyway? And I think a very common thing that happens is like, oh, we got like I'm talking about like in many countries, right? Like that concept of we are going to enact this change. We are going to go ahead and do these things. It's like, let us build a tower that reaches to the heavens.
Right.
And it's like,
This
and what
world
I'm
is
saying,
not, in that sense, this world is not ours. We're waiting for the kingdom to be established.
you got it. You got it. No, because that's what I was saying. It's like,
Yeah.
our kingdom government is different. And I think
Right.
the huge disconnect comes from everyone, not everyone, a lot of people that I talk to think, not just that I talk to, that I see, like from like all the different like studies and all that stuff, is like that we are to put Christianity in our government like a theocracy. That's not the whole point.
No, it shouldn't be a theocracy, but it should be tolerant of people's faith beliefs and stuff. But it's not a theocracy. In fact, I don't want to ever live in a theocracy until the kingdom. To be honest with you.
Thank you. That's exactly the point.
Well, I don't think it's our place to try to create a theocracy because
You got it.
that's Jesus' job. He's bringing it.
Yeah.
Think about it, though.
He'll
How
bring it.
often, especially when it comes to the fundamentalist evangelical. Oh, by the way, I did find out the difference between the two, but that'll be anyway. The fundamentalist evangelical push of the 60s and 70s and early 80s. The whole concept of just like, oh, what was it called? The moral majority?
Oh,
I think
yeah,
that's
I
what it's called?
remember that. Yeah, that was
Oh, Jerry Falwell.
That was the Jerry Falwell. Okay.
Same.
Yeah.
Okay, please understand, like this is the thing, like I personally feel as if that is a very dangerous concept, because it's like, okay, like let's go ahead and put this whole Christianity is like what America is, and we're going to make it into a Christian nation, and it's like that. Like Dad just said, I don't want to be part of a theocracy either. And it's like, I mean, we have theocracies on this planet, and not a single one of them seems to be doing that good of a job. So, but again, it's like, let us, and it's funny because that's how like that concept has, like it's like in Timothy talking about worming its way into. Oh, by the way, I was wrong about the worming thing. It is totally an English concept. In Greek, it means to creep into, like an insect. But anyway, but like that concept worms its way into churches worldwide. You've seen it. Like I'm talking about historically speaking. You've seen it with France has done it. Britain has. Pretty much any European country has tried to have its own version of the church established as a form of theocracy, and it's always been terrible. And so I think it's something to consider. But anyway.
Yeah, but scripturally, it ain't happening until Christ returns.
You've got it. But yet there's like this idea that likes to see its way in there that, no, God wants this. And it's like, don't be Nehemiah. It's like, so. But anyway, I thought it was pertinent that. But back to the high priest thing. Back to the high priest. Just the mere fact alone that it wasn't the Jubilee, it was the high priest's death that allowed for someone who accidentally shed the blood of another human to return to their what do they call it? The inheritance. Because it's like he's not allowed to touch his inheritance until after he came back. But anyway, so I thought it was interesting to bring this up, and the reason why I wanted to bring it up was because it came from my Hebrew group. Like they sent like this newsletter, and it had to do with like, okay, so compare the high priest to Jesus, and like see how see what the correlation, what the threads are between the two. Anyway,
so what you're saying basically that was a foreshadowing of Christ until Christ came.
It says right here. You're right, because it says for the first time in the Bible, the death of the high priest becomes an atoning event. Usually it's the blood of an animal, the payment of compensation, like anything. No, it was the death of the high priest was an atonement for someone else's death. And I thought that was really, really cool.
That is interesting.
If I may there, that even if it was an accident, or, I mean, if it was murder, they had a trial and the person wasn't allowed to stay in the city of refuge. They had a trial to see if they could stay in the city of refuge or if they were turned over to the Avenger of Blood. But if it was an accident, the guy still had to live in exile.
Yeah.
Until the death.
I was just about to say as well. It's like also symbolic of the people living in exile. Yeah, you got that. Yep.
But he was still in exile. He was still punished in the sense, even for an accident.
Yeah. Which puts a whole spin on the concept of what sin is. And that's why we have to be very careful when it comes to saying what sins are good and what sins are evil. Like when you think it's sin is sin. And it's like what I mean is like, we were just having that conversation of like, oh, well, we have the government, we were just talking about like the death of other people when it might be a good idea. It's like, no, from a Christian perspective, it's not. And it's funny because it's like any spin on how it might be ever appropriate for a Christian to take the life of another, that is us defining good and evil, which is us taking from a particular tree that's not one of life. And I think that, like, think about it, it's called the tree of life for a reason. It's like, so.
To me, that brings the question, that brings the question, then why does God allow martyrdom?
Why did Christ die?
I understand, but what I'm saying is, it's just.
This is a good conversation.
It's paradoxical.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, and it makes the cogwheel turn in ways that I'm not always comfortable. And but this is, I think it's important because right now we have been this whole Bible study. We've been facing things that have been barricades for thousands of years now. And now that like we're tearing things down, it's just like really think about it. It's like never because we were talking about martyrs, and when you look at Stephen, and it's just like, and what did Stephen say? Forgive them, and it's like, and no one avenged Stephen's death.
They couldn't.
Why not?
No, they couldn't though.
Did he not have family?
I'm sure he had family.
So why didn't they avenge that death?
But they couldn't because of the political atmosphere.
You're right. No, you're right. You're absolutely right. But what I'm saying is, they take anyone who died. Like, because I understand that the cities of refuge weren't still there, but don't tell me that Avengers of Blood weren't still around. Like like there absolutely were. The Zealots were a major part of that. Like they were definitely avenging the blood of their ancestors.
Yeah, but the Avenger of Blood would have had a huge job because there were a lot of people in on that one.
The Zealots were the whole thing with that.
Yeah.
Like how they had to hide themselves out in the mountains, well, hill regions, like kind of like plateaus. But anyway, that's what the whole concept was, and they were known for living by the sword. And so, go ahead.
But Joel, the Avenger of Blood originally was not intended that way. The Avenger of Blood, when it was established, was a close of kin. That you killed my brother or you killed my sister, and they're going after him as to get vengeance and to justice or whatever you want to say. It wasn't meant for a vigilante group. It was a personal thing, one-on-one kind of thing. It was not a militia
so that's
or...
its own form of vigilantism.
What?
That's its own form of vigilantism.
I think you got to look at it too in the Old Testament society and in the social economic groups that they had back then, and that was probably a
concession.
What do you call? concession, right?
Compromise.
Because I bet you the other people, the Canaanites and the Philistines, had another methodology for taking care of that kind of thing, and God put
I agree.
limits around them. They put a
Yeah.
fence around them. But it wasn't
Right.
intended as a militia group or a rebel group or a neighborhood watch that was really your vigilantes that were taking care of business in the
Right.
neighborhood.
You're totally right. But then we have the Pharisees.
What was the matter with the Pharisees?
The
Pharisees were great
ideas
people.
of the Old Testament and decided, hey, we're going to amplify this a little bit.
I don't know about that.
Not to mention, this is the other thing.
You got to look at the Israel at the time when they were coming back from their captivity, and they had limited government. Well, they had a government, and then in some move they invited the Romans to come in to settle the problems with the Greek powers around them. But that's another thing. But it was a government within a government, and they were part of it in a sense that way. But it wasn't the original state of Israel or Judah.
No, by far, no. Like you're right. Yeah, you're definitely right. No, you're definitely right with that. No, I'm just trying. Okay, I get that.
I think anything from the captivity on was not like the original state.
That's a big point as well. Isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
For me, I just think it's funny to look at the whole recently. I would say past 6 months, or slightly more. I've been like looking at like every shared belief throughout the different like dimensions of Christianity. For example, like with various stances in terms of like what like for example murder, like when is it ever okay to have someone killed, right? Or things like that. And it's funny because I'm starting to see that almost none of it is okay. So I'm like that's interesting to me. To look at like how much the past 2,000 years have completely diluted the entire concept of what Christianity was meant to be. And it's like we've known that, but it's like to actually really see and to even in this conversation now still get uncomfortable at times because it really starts to shake. Like even though we've torn down a lot of like barriers, there's still some that are still taking a while to tear down. So for me as well. So anyway. Okay, I'm looking here at the end of Hebrews 2, and so it's going back to the whole concept of how. So I'm going to reread verse 17, the last verse of chapter 2. Therefore, it was necessary for him to be made in every respect like us, his brothers and sisters, so that he could be our merciful and faithful high priest before God. Then he could offer a sacrifice that would take away the sins of the people. Since he himself has gone through suffering and testing, he is able to help us when we are being tested. And then we talked about the concept of Moses like having a glowing face, and how, what was it that, okay, so it was, Yahweh said to Moses that when he went before Pharaoh, he was going to look like Elohim to Pharaoh, and as well as to the people. Like he came across as God on earth, right? And so the Jewish people definitely knew of this concept at the time. And so like what is chapter 3 about is the whole concept of how Jesus is even better than Moses in terms of like hierarchy. And anyway, so I'm trying to take a look here for a couple clear-cut examples of that before we get on break. I'm looking at the beginning here. God, okay, wait. Okay, so in verse 5, let's take a look in like the whole visualization thing here. So Moses was certainly faithful in God's house as a servant, talking about like how you have the house and like you have the servant, and the servant's not great. And so the person who built the house deserves more praise than the house itself. But yet Moses was a servant of that house, right? And his work was an illustration of the truths God would reveal later. But Christ, as the Son, is in charge of God's entire house. And we are God's house. It's very temple imagery of like how God is like living in us, right? Because like he is living in the house, right? If we keep our courage and remain confident in our hope in Christ, that is why the Holy Spirit says, today when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as Israel did when they rebelled, when they tested me in the wilderness. There your ancestors tested and tried my patience, even though they saw my miracles for 40 years. So anyway, so you got this whole poetry here. Anyway, and I love how it says in verse 15, it's an exact repetition. And we were talking before about like how repetition is important. So when you take a look at verse 7, it says, that's why the Holy Spirit says, today when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as Israel did when they rebelled. Then in verse 12, it says, be careful then, dear brothers and sisters, make sure that your own hearts are not evil and unbelieving, turning you away from the living God. And then down in 15, it says, today, when you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts as Israel did when they rebelled. It's like, it's definitely being repeated here. It's like, don't make your heart hard. Allow God to keep it, like, fleshy, like, soft, like, not hard like stone. So, and talking about entering his rest, I'm trying to think, like, if they entered his rest, that would have been the word that is related to Noah, because the only way you could enter rest was the Hebrew word talking in Joshua is that way. Let me show you real quick. It's Joshua 1:15. Oh, I gotta see something cool. Another rabbit trail before break. You will definitely like this one. Although, if you're not a nerd, then maybe you're not. Or don't love nerdy things. All right, so in Joshua 1:15, until that, you're always given rest. Do you see the N? And do you see the H with a dot? That is the word that is similar to Noah, right? And so this is usually the word that is used when it's like you go into, well, to let something into someone else's rest. And this is the word that's being used here. Now, I want to show you something. This is really cool. No, why can't? Oh, there it is. Okay, let's take a look. No, Sabbath. Concordance. Okay, Exodus 16:3. Oh, there we are. So, do you see these three letters? And does that with rest? Yeah. Okay. So, see how it's kind of like a W? This one's kind of like a backwards Z, and this one, I don't know, kind of like, I don't know, some like kind of like an A without the line. It's the same three letters, right? And it looks very similar. But it's the word for returning or repenting or relenting. Don't tell me, do not tell me that there is a wordplay happening here when you have given as rest and you will return spelled exactly the same way, because it doesn't always look like that. This word is usually just the first two. Yeah, usually it's just this W-looking thing and this backwards C-looking thing. And so the fact that there's a taut right there, it's telling me it's definitely doing wordplay there. Is there any other way to say to return or to come back? Absolutely there is. 110% there is. So why would it be that you have like this, this, to me it's definite wordplay. So I had to show that. Anyway. Trying to get up here. All right, there we go. Okay. Let me just check real quick to make sure I don't have anything else I wanted to talk about before break. Oh yeah, so talking about entering his rest and all that stuff, and it's like, well, now there's a new way of entering his rest, and that is in verse 4. It's like, wait a second. So this is writing to the Hebrews. Now this is like all across the Roman Empire, right? But it is interesting talking about like entering God's rest again. Anyway, so where it says God's promise of entering his rest still stands, so we ought to tremble with fear that some of you might fail to experience it. For this good news that God has prepared this rest has been announced to us just as it was to them. But it did them no good because they didn't share the faith of those who listened to God. And it's for only we who believe can enter his rest. As for the others, God said, in my anger I took an oath. They will never enter my place of rest. Which comes from Gavin Saul. So, even though this rest has been ready since he made the world. That's a funny one as well. Like, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and pause for right now. I need to collect my thoughts real quick, and then we'll come back after a few minutes. But for anyone else who's like online and watching this video, it's like that fast. So catch you on the other side of that. So during break, a thought hit me, and I had to ask Mom to fill that back in because it's like, wait a second, there's a section when someone gets healed, and it's name it. Like when someone gets healed and asks, it's Elisha, right? Or Elisha, that if it would be okay to like escort his master to a temple, and it's like he's used as like a kind of like he bows down in order to support his master, right? And Elisha told him
he had to bow to the idol just with the king.
Didn't it say something like he had to wait? Let's take a look at it.
He had to bow to the idol with the king
as respect, right?
Yeah.
No, because he was helping the king bow, and he knew that he wasn't bowing, the king was.
I knew it.
Yeah, the king leaned on.
I knew it.
Yeah.
He was leaned on, right? So
but he still had to bow with him. He couldn't just stand there and the king bowed and he didn't.
Right. And so I think right, but he was used as kind of like a shoulder to lean on, basically. And anyway, So so I think it's interesting that when we also are looking at various points of Christianity, I think I could bring it up kind of sort of before it when we were going through like Elijah and Elisha, but like it just to look at that again in a Christian perspective. It's like, do we honestly think? Let's ask about modern Christianity. Does modern Christianity think that it is a good idea to be in the houses of worship at all of other religions? Or let's say, like, if you had like a boss who was I don't know, let's just throw it out there, like Muslim or something, and then like needed help actually getting onto the prayer road, and that you would actually be bowing down at the same time. It's like, do you think that, I personally don't think that a lot of, I guess you could say the great Christian fear of things, like, I don't think that would be necessarily promoted or said as something that could be done in peace, I guess you could say. I think you know what I'm saying with that, that it's very much frowned upon to do something like that. And I think that's like another example of like how a lot of what we're growing up to believe is like, no, you have to do this, you have to do that. Like what you said this during break, it's like Elisha didn't come with him with like the thing like, no, you got to do this, you have to act in this way, you have to do these things. It's like it didn't really, that was not the case at all. And I think that's definitely like what we're encountering in terms of like in the modern sphere. In anything to the contrary, anything that is not Christian all the way is considered evil to the utmost extreme, and I think that's a very dangerous way of thinking. Not to mention, Christ like would like be among the worst of the worst in order to like reach out to those who didn't think that they were healthy.
But if you want to take the analogy a step further,
please do.
When Naaman was healed, it was like Elisha, when he told him to go in peace, his purpose was not to convert Naaman. His purpose was to witness to him. And when Gehazi went and took the money from him, then God's wrath fell on the servant who should have known better. Because it was a bad example. It was a bad witness. So, I mean, Elisha's servant Gehazi, when he ran after Naaman and said, I'm going to get some of the good, and he went after him.
There's also...
And he took from him. So he basically set a bad example and took away from what Elisha was doing.
That's an example of seeing something and thinking it's a good idea to take it.
But what I'm saying is...
No, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, what I'm saying is it was a bad example to Naaman of what God was about. And
oh, I see where you're going at this now.
It was a bad example to Naaman what God was about. And Gehazi should have known, or Gehazi, or whatever, however you pronounce it, he should have known better. And Elisha told him, is it time to take things like that? And then he became the leper.
This is the story when he was like, no, I need to actually get something out of this guy.
Yeah, I'm going to get something out of this guy.
Okay,
and he's like, why should he get away scot-free? I'm going to, I need my benefit.
Like, and then he used like Elisha's name over to say, no, he changed his mind.
Yeah.
This is what.
And Elisha basically told him, you really set a bad example of what God's about, of what's going on here, and you should have known better, and it was him that was punished, not Naaman.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
It was interesting because he told Naaman, go in peace.
Yep.
You could bow to your idol, go in peace. But Gehazi went and did that, and Elisha said, to whom much is given, much is expected. And Gehazi knew, and he went against what God was about, and he bore punishment.
I think another example is when you also have the one who, this doesn't relate. I was thinking about like the prophet who was told, go do this and don't talk to anyone on the way and don't listen.
the nameless prophet.
Yeah, okay. But that's kind of like an obscure example, so I'm not going to go into that one. But I do like the one with like Gehazi. And
so what I'm saying is, God's condemnation doesn't fall on people
normally
who are not enlightened. Let's put it that way. Whose eyes aren't open, and it's scripturally, most people's eyes are not yet open.
You're right.
And his God's wrath is on, and unless it's for a witness to them, you know, like when the nations are set up and taken down because they're evil. But in this case, I think the example there is that, you know, God expects more from those who know than he does from those who don't.
That's a good point too, going back to the whole concept of, like what we were just talking about before, about like the different way of looking at the world, like with like the killing of someone and stuff like that. It's just like those who know better, like when you can, like there's, like for example, like, okay, think about it, like, you know, like when Paul says, like, if it to this person something is a sin, like that type of a thing. To me, I do believe that it is a sin to take the life of another in any way, shape, or form at all, ever. I do believe, however, that Christ died for all sin. So but I recognize that it is never upon me to enact, like as a Christian, not to take the life of another. But I also understand that murderers and people who have shed blood before, that Christ died for them too. And that, like, that whole concept is just like, I will not, and to, like, I don't know, my biggest issue is, like, loving them as I would love myself in that situation. And it's hard for me to try to categorize that. But it's a puzzle to me that I'm enjoying, like, being on that personal journey with God with. I don't know if I'm making sense with that. But it's a puzzle to me to try to, like, although, I have an example, but go ahead.
No, I often find a lot of Peter in me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Give me the sword, right?
Yeah.
I got one. I have an example. I'm going to go offline, and I'm sorry for anyone who's watching this on YouTube. I am going to iterate an example, but it's something that can't be put online for a very specific reason. So please trust me with that one. Confidentiality stuff. It has nothing to do with counseling or anything like that, but it's just like I can't easily talk about that here. So hold on. Okay, we're back. I just had an example that was in my mind. I just wanted to get off my chest. So anyway, but yeah, that's like the whole concept of loving someone. But anyway. I love the logic of chapter 4. And it's funny because the congregation that I'm attending, has them focusing on the early portions of Joshua for quite some time. And it's funny here that, I love how Hebrews says in verse 8 of chapter 4, it goes, now, if Joshua had succeeded in giving them this rest, God would not have spoken about another day of rest still to come. And so there is a special rest still waiting for the people of God. And that is the kingdom. When you think of the concept of when the Israelites crossed the Jordan, and it's like God is giving you this rest. That is emblematic of the kingdom. It's because remember, at that time they didn't have kings yet. It was God was their king. And it's the same concept when you're talking about the kingdom of heaven, is God is king, and yet the people rule in that sense, and how we rule is through servitude and godly love, and like doing things that like the whole rest of it's like that's why what I was saying was in the last 6 to 9 months, really looking at everything and saying, is there anything that isn't affected by my human reasoning? Like when I'm talking about like in terms of Christianity, it's like I have to I call it like dissection, like where it's like trying to figure out, it's like, wait a second, what does God say in terms of a lot of things? Because again, a lot of things that we think are the Christian mentality have ended up not being so, and I think it's become even more glaringly clear. So anyway, big point here is verse 12 of chapter 4. For the word of God is alive and powerful. It is sharper than the sharpest two-edged sword, cutting between soul and spirit, between joint and marrow. It exposes our innermost thoughts and desires. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God. Everything is naked and exposed before his eyes, and he is the one to whom we are accountable. It's basically like there is no covering of shame when you're before him.
An interesting point here that I noticed in 12 is that soul is not spirit. There's a division of soul and spirit.
We're gonna get there, but that's
I'm
why
just
I
saying,
brought it
it's
up.
just like, aha, you know.
So let's get there. Let's go to the other comparisons there. What's the difference between joint and marrow?
Fluid?
Where are you going with that? Because joints are different from marrow.
They are different, but how intertwined are they?
Marrow is where your red blood cells come from inside your bones. It's a life-giving substance. But joints affect movement.
You're right, but isn't there I remember it being compared to? Hold on, 1 second. What? Okay, so wait, this verse is Hebrews. I remember it basically being said it's like that part of the body that really coalesces to the point where you can't figure out what the difference is unless you go under a microscope. Hold on 1 second. I just want to make sure that this is. I do believe it was this verse. I'm almost dead certain. I just want to make sure this is the word. It keeps doing the wrong word. Okay. Wait. Okay, we got it. Yeah, that's marrow. I remember it basically being explained as this. Is that it wasn't necessarily joint and marrow, but it was more like muscle and bone. Or like cartilage and bone.
That would make more sense.
It's basically saying how can you, when you eat a chicken wing, for example, how easy really is it for you to make the clear-cut distinction between the joint and where it connects to you through cartilage and all that? You know what I'm talking about. And it's how can a sword actually clean-cut slice the two of them apart? And it's basically saying they're so intertwined that it's no two-edged sword could actually do that. And going back to your comment was that no, the word of God is sharper than any two-edged sword that splits between the physical aspect and the breath of life. And it's that is so cool. It's we are like it's like we are with the breath of life, but like you can't remove the breath of life from us or else we die. But yet, if the Word of God can separate the two, it's like that.
Yeah, the soul and spirit. I mean, it says right there basically, soul is physical.
Yeah,
Spirit
definitely.
and spirit.
And it's like
interesting. Wasn't that in John 3? That which is born of the flesh is flesh. Spirit is spirit.
Right. That is. And the word in Greek is basically based on the word for mnemonic, like lungs, like breath. But anyway, and like the word for soul is psyche, which is like seen as the.
Oh, that's the Greek.
Yeah, the Greek.
Okay.
Right.
The other word is nephesh.
Wait, no. The soul. I think it's still psyche. Hold on. I think it's still psyche. Yep.
The psyche is just your thought.
Yeah, but like remember we're talking about like the heart, the soul, the heart, soul, and strength. But yeah, it's like, but remember he talks about it exposes our innermost thoughts and desires, and it's I don't know, it's really cool like how it's so intertwined. It's like your psyche.
Psyche, basically.
So the word psyche in the concordance here is the breath of life, the human soul, the seat of affection and will, the self, a human person, an individual. But I love how it's like, it could be also the breath of life. But if you look at the other one that's like pneumos, or it's like basically based on our word for like lungs or like pneumatic or whatever, that is the word for spirit. Yep, the wind, the breath, the spirit. So I don't know. It's really cool. It's like those two are so intertwined that like, but it's God's word split the two. I think the imagery is really great. But anyway, and then you have verse 14. So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. That's a direct reference to Zechariah 3. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most. And then it goes in like this whole thing to like what a high priest is, and it's just. Hold on. We talked about a lot of this other stuff before too, but I want to make sure that I'm not missing anything here. Just give me 1 second. Oh yes. So there was a direct reference to Psalm 8. I believe it is in Psalm 8 where they're talking about babbling babies. I believe it's that one. I could be wrong, but I think it is babbling babies is Psalm 8. Yep, totally. Yeah. So talking about like the just babbling babies, right? It's funny because like you have chapter 5, verse 11 and 12. There is much more we would like to say about this, but it is difficult. Oh, and I love how it says we. That's interesting. There's much more we would like to say about this, but it is difficult to explain, especially since you are spiritually dull and don't seem to listen. You have been believers so long now that you ought to be teaching others. Instead, you need someone to teach you again the basic things about God's Word. You are like babies who need milk and cannot eat solid food. And it's yeah, I think that's interesting. Actually, I was going through that particular thought recently having to do with like how often do people, especially American Christians, like how often do like particularly Christians of like very advanced societies, right? And it's like how often do they just like plateau at the infantile stage? I did for a while. And it's like and I see it a lot, like in terms of like look at the whole national genre of it. Like when we come across those who have been born, like when you know have been born again, it's like they just stop. It's like a lot of them do. And there's little spiritual growth, but it's Hebrews, right, that talks about like the itching ears. Wives, sails, and itching ears.
I don't know.
I know Paul talks about some of that. No, it's in Timothy. It's in 2 Timothy. Never mind. So, anyway, I love it how Hebrews 6 begins with like, let's stop going over the basic teachings of Christ again and again. And it's very true. It's like the basics should be known among Christians. So it's like where is that extra milk coming from? Like where is that the meat and potato is basically coming from? Anyway. Just saying that there's I'm just going to mention, but it's neither here nor there. The whole concept, some people say that like the once saved, always saved. Some people say that can't be the case. And those who say that can't be the case often reference this section in Scripture, which is Hebrews 6, verses 4 to 6, I think. But I think there's like, I think that's arguable on both sides, so I'm not going to go into it much further, but I just wanted to say this is where that argument comes from. It's like, well, that's not necessarily the case, once saved, always saved. But anyway, it's like, I think it really depends, because the way I personally see it is when God has changed your life so much and so drastically, it's like, why, I cannot personally imagine, like, directly going against him. Like ever again, not after my eyes have been opened in this way, if you get what I'm saying. It is like, I think there's like a certain point that it's like, there's no going back. I mean, of course, if I really wanted to, I guess I could go in his face, but it's like, I think you get what I'm pointing. It's like, I think it's neither here nor there, that whole argument, but still, it's, anyway. Oh, no, okay. We will talk about, okay, I will remember this. That's how we'll end. All right, we'll talk about, thought just came to my head. Anyway. That whole thing about Melchizedek. We've talked about Melchizedek. Hebrews really goes into Melchizedek being like high priest, but also king. We have talked about the 3 levels of, just to reiterate, we've talked about the 3 levels of servitude, I guess you could say. Kingship, priestship, and what's, I forget the other one. He was priest, king, and what? Hold on. What, I'm like losing something right now. There were 3 things that Christ was. He was the priest, he was the king, priest king, and I'm missing one. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But like the whole concept is that like Christ fulfills 3 roles. And there was like this whole thing that has to do with like Melchizedek, like in how he fulfills similar roles. He doesn't necessarily come from the priestly line of the Levites. He comes from the kingly line of David, but yet you have Melchizedek. It's like no one really knows where he came from, but he was still a priest. And it was that whole concept of like being a priest is like it's not necessarily defined only through the priestly tribe, or the priestly branch of the family. So anyway, yeah, because it's like in verse 11 it goes right into like the priesthood of Levi. Oh, and like also like how Aaron. Aaron was not part of the Levites. Was he?
Yes.
Yes, he was. What am I thinking?
He was Moses' brother.
Yeah, Moses.
They were Levites.
Moses did. There was someone else, but I know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But we did talk about David also behaving like a priest, like by wearing certain garments. There was that whole thing where like Joseph served as a priest because he interceded for Pharaoh, and there's that he did a very priestly thing there. Moses was from the tribe of the Levites. Oh, that's another thing. So why would Paul be able to become a Pharisee of sorts? He wasn't necessarily a priest, but he definitely served something similar to a priestly role as a Pharisee, although he was from the tribe of Benjamin. And so I think like the whole point here is that like Jesus absolutely could have been not from the tribe of Levi because it was foretold that he would be from David's line, but through Judah. But anyway. I think something is very interesting. Let's take a look at verse 19 and dissect that one. For the law never made anything perfect. But now we have confidence in a better hope through which we draw near to God. My question would be, like seriously speaking, the law never made anything perfect. And oftentimes it's even still taught among Jewish people today that like although you can't be perfect at doing the law in itself is perfection. And I think that's pretty interesting too, that like nothing was made perfect through the law. And remember how Paul himself talked about that the law contained sin, and just kept it like in a state. And I think it's something to ponder, that particular sentence of the law never made anything perfect.
Right. I have an observation.
Please.
You were talking about Jesus not being a Levite. I think it's appropriate that he's not a Levite because he's our high priest, and he's also made us a nation of kings and priests.
Oh no, that's the whole point. We
not
definitely
Levites.
Mm-hmm.
So he's made us a nation of kings and priests, and we're not Levitical, but he was the first among many brethren. Mm-hmm. So he set the example.
There was a reason why in Hebrews it was very early on it was talking about like the brothers and sisters and stuff like that. Hold on one second. I'm looking for it. Okay. Hold on one second. I keep saying the same thing, but just go to chapter 12, verse 22. So what Mom just said is exemplified here. No, and they say you haven't come to a physical mountain. You've come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to countless thousands of angels in a joyful gathering. You have come to the assembly of God's firstborn children. We were talking about being like the first fruits and stuff like that. Anyway, Firstborn children, the assembly, by the way, the assembly, it's like a council chamber, isn't it? The assembly of God's firstborn children whose names are written in heaven. Remember, it's like, I know all the stars by name. And then we have, anyway.
And that's another thing, too. The church of the firstborn who are registered, meaning it sounds like there's a whole lot more to follow.
I agree.
But the firstborn are not many, but there's a lot more to follow.
Remember, I keep saying preview of coming attractions. I'm definitely kind of really spoiling the ending a little bit, but we've been spoiling the ending for quite a while. But I wanted to say, like, how amazing Hebrews is in terms of, like, getting to the point. Of, like, okay, because there's, like, a whole bunch of discussion going into, like, who Jesus is, why he fulfills, like, the whole thing of, like, Melchizedek, how he was the first among many, and then it was talking about the examples of faith, and it's like who you are, and like what it means to be Christian and all that.
The example of the first fruits of the harvest. It's always the smallest part of the harvest.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Other than the very tail end, the very beginning and the very end are the smallest parts of the harvest.
We were talking about the narrow path, and I was just saying that, and you said it was right. That's what I was kind of saying, is like the first fruit, it's not the most. It's like, it's not the most. It's like the slim picking.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
The fraction of the following harvest.
Yeah, exactly. Which is interesting, isn't it? Because you have the great harvest of the feast. Like, we're talking about like the fall time feast. Anyway. So
yeah, interestingly enough, them also representing the millennial reign, and
yes, that's exactly the point. And it's also the wedding.
Yep.
It's also the wedding.
Huge
the trumpet. Oh, don't even. Okay. So anyway, so let's you've come to the assembly of God's firstborn children whose names are written in heaven. You've come to God Himself, who is the judge over all things. You have come to the Spirit of the righteous ones in heaven, of the righteous ones in heaven who have now been made perfect. Wait, the law has never made anyone perfect or anything perfect. But it says right here, you have come to the Spirit of the righteous ones in heaven who have now been made perfect, not by the law. You have come to Jesus, the one who mediates, or like the intercessor, mediates the new covenant between God and people, and to the sprinkled blood, which speaks of forgiveness, instead of crying out like Cain's blood. Like Abel's blood, crying out for vengeance, talking about like the whole concept of the avenging of blood. And so Christ's blood speaks of forgiveness instead of crying out for vengeance like the blood of Abel. I think the point is very clear now, especially. It
doesn't say that the firstborn are in heaven. It says they are registered.
Yeah, that's true.
In heaven.
They're citizens of it.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the registry, it's like a counting of the names of those who have citizenship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's take a look at the next verse. I know we're spending a lot of time in 12, but look at that. This stuff. Like, what I love about this, it's like we're talking about like this stuff, and we're talking about like different discussion points, like all like group long, and now we just jumped a few chapters, and it's like there's a reason why we're talking about these things. So, verse 25. Be careful. So remember, it's saying this blood does not ask for vengeance. It asks for forgiveness. It begs for forgiveness. Verse 25, be careful that you do not refuse to listen to the one who is speaking. What's the blood saying? Right, so, for if the people of Israel did not escape when they refused to listen to Moses, the earthly messenger, we will certainly not escape if we reject the one who speaks to us from heaven. Okay, so we're talking about the law, and the law never made anything perfect, right? And we're talking about like that whole thing about like cities of refuge, all that stuff, and like the avenging of blood. And it's like, but it's no. This Christ's blood it's like through Christ, like it's set up in 24, where it says he mediates the new covenant, right? We just talked about how the old covenant does not make anything perfect. And yet we have Christ who mediates through the new with the new covenant and serves as the mediator. And it's his blood that he didn't cry out to his Father in heaven saying, avenge my death, versus Abel's blood. Like, and remember how Christ is the second Adam and how we are to be the second Eve. And it's like, but when his blood spills onto the ground, he doesn't ask he doesn't ask for vengeance. It's definitely for forgiveness. And you look at Stephen, it's like, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. And it's repeated from Jesus to Stephen and on and on. And that's the whole concept of Christianity. We follow, we take up our cross, we follow him, we imitate Paul, we imitate Christ, all that stuff. And it's like Christ didn't kill anybody. And I'm not just saying with murder. It's like, look at all the teachings of Christ. It's like Christ didn't do a lot of things that Christianity says is what we should do. And so I think it's something to ponder. It's like, oh yeah, Christ put himself in situations where like those in leadership were like, why are you going to such places? Why are you saying such things? Why are you hanging out with such characters? And why are you saying such things? Why are you eating such things? And it's like, yeah, that's just not how God rolls. So anyway. All right, so let me see if I missed anything. Okay, so we're talking about the high priest. Old rules about worship. I'm just making sure. Okay, so remember that whole section where it talks about like the old covenant couldn't make anything perfect, but Christ does because of the new covenant. A great example of this is in chapter 9, verse 9. So, where it says, this is an illustration pointing to the present time. And it's funny because there's a lot of scriptures that point to the present time, like Zechariah 3. It's exactly what Hebrews is getting at. But what they were talking about was like the most holy place in the temple and like in the Ark of the Covenant. But yet there are many places where it says this is an example of things to come, which is exactly why when we come across Revelation, like he says, like these are things that are to come, because this is a very scriptural thing that happens all the time. Anyway, this is an illustration pointing to the present time. For the gifts and sacrifices that the priests offered. So remember, Christ is the high priest, but yet the priests sacrificed, they presented offerings. So the gifts and sacrifices that the priests offer are not able to cleanse the consciences of the people who bring them. For that old system deals only with food and drink and various cleansing ceremonies, physical regulations that were in effect only until a better system could be established. And it's funny because it's like when you think about that, what did the high priest do? They would dip their hand into the blood and they would sprinkle it, right? And it's like they didn't technically, it wasn't their blood, first of all, and it didn't pour out from their side, and it wasn't like you get what I'm saying. It's like Christ's sacrifice was ultimate on every level. And it paled, like just the sprinkling of blood across the altar, like paled in comparison to Christ pouring out his blood mixed with water, like when he died on the cross. It's just, I love the imagery here. I love how it's like, it's just amazing to me. Anyway, I'm taking a look here. There's a mention of the cross here. Hold on. Yeah, and it's exemplified in verse 23. That's when we're talking about the sprinkling of blood and all that stuff. That's why the tabernacle and everything in it, which were copies of things in heaven, had to be purified by the blood of animals. But the real things in heaven had to be purified with far better sacrifices than the blood of animals. For Christ did not enter into a holy place made with human hands, which was only a copy of the true one in heaven. He had entered into heaven itself to appear now before God on our behalf. He intercedes for us. And he did not enter heaven to offer himself again and again, like the high priest here on earth who enters the most holy place year after year with the blood of an animal. If that had been necessary, Christ would have had to die again and again ever since the world began. But now, once for all time, he has appeared at the end of the age to remove sin by his own death as a sacrifice. I love this section because how often do we keep killing Christ? Like, how often do we think that his sacrifice, it's very human, and I think he has that grace to understand us on that level. It's like, how often do we think that his sacrifice isn't enough? It's like we have to keep killing him again and again. Like, what I mean by it is a common theme is like a very ever-present guilty conscience that I've seen in pretty much all Western Christianity. I would have to say Protestant Christianity, I would say. The Catholic version, it's like, yeah, there's like a guilty conscience, but it's always like atoned for, like through their own way. But like in Protestantism, it's like I am so lowly. I'm nothing. I'm not I don't add up. You've got to, and it's like keep forgiving me and forgiving me and forgiving me. It's like I hear it all the time. It's like, and it's not just like any single like denomination either. It's like the whole thing. It's like how often do we have to keep asking for Christ's forgiveness? And how often do we have to keep like doing the guilty conscience thing? That's just very, very much a part of like modern day Christianity. But
I want to go to the other side of that coin.
Please do.
The other side of that coin is it's blaming everybody in the world for the problems that we have and condemning anybody who doesn't believe the quote Christian mantra, end quote, and they're all going to hell. And all the problems in the world are caused by these people. And if you go to
can you repeat that whole thing again? I didn't quite grasp the whole gist. Can you say it one more time?
I'm talking about the flip side of the coin of
the flip side of the coin of I'm guilty. Yeah.
To go to if you're not like me and feeling guilty, and believe the way we do, then
the guilty conscience.
Yeah,
okay.
Then you are the cause of all the world's problems, and you're going to hell. Like saying atheists are all going to hell, or
anyone who's not Christian is going to hell. I've heard that. I've absolutely heard that.
that we have to save them. It's not our job. And the thing is here at the end of chapter 8. This is about Israel, but we are the new Israel.
Yes.
Basically.
Well, no,
I'm talking about the nation of kings and priests.
Oh no, I agree.
And the new covenant.
I just need to clarify real quick that what all I was just saying was it's just like it's clear through Paul's writings that it's like we're part of Israel. It's like we're grafted on.
We're the new
seed.
Yeah, we're the new seed of Abraham, right? Yeah. So I think this is beautiful though. For verse 10, this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my laws in their mind and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And I love this. None of them shall teach his neighbor, and none his brother, saying, know the Lord, because God is going to open the hearts and minds of the people himself. And it says, for all shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, for I will be merciful to their unrighteousness, and their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more. He's make a new covenant. God's going to open the hearts and minds of the people himself, and make I mean, that's the great multitude.
Right, you're right. You're absolutely right.
And it's not our business to condemn them because they don't know God at this point. It's not our business. In condemning them to a fate worse than death, God doesn't do that.
Yeah. Because he's the one that overflows in mercy. It's like, how much does our own mercy toward other people overflow? And the only problem I have with that, though, and this is huge to me, is like, how far does that go when it comes to, like, internally as well? I think... Nope, never mind. I answer my own question. Basically, it's like, it goes back to what we were talking about, like with Gehazi. He should have known better. And I think that it's like when people should know better, that's a big point. But then you have like the problem, like where they know better, but it's more like they're like the babies without milk. That's like a problem throughout all of America.
But to constantly be self-condemning, I believe that that's a lack of faith.
Yeah.
Because it's calling God a liar. Because he says, you repent and return from your evil ways, and he will remove our sins from us as far as east is from the west. And he won't even think about it. He gives you a clean slate. And oh shoot, I forgot where I was going with it. I'll think of it. I'll bring it up.
No, I think your point was still very clear.
And he makes it possible then for us to I just totally lost it. But maybe I'm not supposed to say it. But it's basically a lack of faith in God's mercy and justice and belief in what He's doing with us. You know, to continually condemn ourselves. Oh, that's where I was going with it. Thank you. Paul said, "Oh, it's human." And it is right to remember that we're sinful, because Paul says, oh, miserable man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? What's the next line? I thank God that through Jesus Christ, my Savior, He saved me, basically, from this body of death. So you can say I'm miserable and less than dirt, but thank God there's a remedy.
I think
to self-flagellate constantly, I don't think is... It's
like a verbal self-flagellation. Yeah. I agree with you. It's like, and it's funny because it's like I've talked to people about it before and they don't see it. It's it's like a constant guiltiness. It's like we have to like cry like about like, and this is the thing. Like, don't get me wrong. Okay, let me make a clarification here, because like I love listening to like certain it's like my life in Christ is extremely joyful, right? But I do like to be reminded of the sorrow where I was, like, because I think like it goes back to Paul, like, oh wretched man that I am, and I thank God for that. But it's like I'm not going to sit here like crying over how horrible of a person I am when God has totally changed me.
But that makes God's grace even more wonderful.
Exactly.
When you can see it from that perspective, that even magnifies Him more. But I don't think He wants us to be just sitting around wallowing in self-condemnation.
It puts it into like a slave mentality. It basically puts you like, oh, I have this very firm belief that Christ doesn't want us groveling at His feet.
I think Jesus said it when when they brought the adulteress to him. And he said, at that point, he said, where are those that condemn you? And that could be ourselves.
Right. You're right. Yeah, exactly.
Where are your condemners? Where are they? And he said, then neither do I condemn you. Go.
And
he holds no condemnation for it.
And I think that's like the biggest thing. It's just like when we recognize it. Like, this is how I view it, right? This is just how I view it. When you are struck by God like a giganticized Mack truck that smacks you in the face and knocks you on the ground, basically. Like, emotionally speaking, spiritually speaking. It's like, that's when the fear of God sets in. It just is like, you realize, it's like momentary. It's like you realize that like this is like it's like a crucial point when it's like, when you realize that he doesn't condemn you. You don't have to go to him with a guilty conscience, because it's like, that's when he's like, dude, I've already taken care of that. Oh, and it's like, but you remember how it was before. Go ahead.
I have an example too for, and maybe I shouldn't. This is going to be a hard thing.
Can you hold on to that, because I really wanted to finish something.
Yeah, do that.
So when God like smacks you down, and because you're talking about formula, smacks you down, and then you realize that he's already forgiven you. It's like, I am not okay. Let's just say I did something really, really wrong, and I went to someone for forgiveness. And then they're like, dude, it's totally fine. It's like I really don't care. It's like, it's not like I'm going to drop on the ground and grab onto that person's foot forever, right? Like, I might be extremely appreciative, but then it just makes that bond between us even stronger. And it's like, I don't think that Christ wants us to. I don't think that Christ wants us.
Go ahead. I'll just.
You're fine. I don't think that Christ wants us to always.
Well, it's probably electric company.
You answered it.
I can't help you. I'm sorry. It was the electric company. The electric was off.
Oh, okay. The concept of. No, I just lost it. Hold on. Oh yeah, I'm not going to be on the ground crying every single day because Christ saved me, but it's like, no, but you don't understand how bad of a person I am, God. Like, let me tell you more about that. And it's like, that's basically how I see it. Like, I see it like, no, God, I'll tell you more about what a wretched soul I am. It's
like, kind of a lack of faith in his.
It is. And then it's like, here is in Hebrews, like, I think it's in 11 where it talks about, like, the whole faith. Like, it's like you have Enoch, Abraham, Moses, Joe, all of that. Isaac, all that stuff. Anyway, go ahead with what you were going to say.
Yeah.
We're almost done, guys. We're almost done. We're like rounding.
Well, I'm wondering if I should, because it's going to be a little controversial.
We have been in controversy before.
Okay. The self-flagellation is one thing, too. And then back to I have a bugaboo about condemning unbelievers.
Oh, yeah,
because
absolutely. I always have.
To me, when we do that, or anybody that does, would do well to read the parable about the servant who was forgiven a debt, the debtor who was forgiven the debt, and then hauled off and reviled the person that owed something even smaller than what he did, and what Jesus had to say about that.
But how often is that parable only used to aid someone's argument? It's
yeah, but look at it this way:
no, I didn't mean your argument.
What I'm saying is, we have been forgiven a tremendous debt, and there are those in this world who have not been blessed enough yet at this point to have their debt removed. And who are we to be calling in that debt when God has it, when he's forgiven us everything that he has? Who are we to condemn them and say, oh, they're
worthy of
eternal punishment or whatever, when God forgave us and God in his grace gave us that forgiveness now when theirs is yet to come, and who are we to condemn them to hellfire and brimstone when God forgave us, when we should be forgiving of them as God's forgiving of us?
The woman that was getting stoned, what did she do? Was she committing adultery?
It was adultery.
Yeah.
She was caught in adultery.
Yeah, she was caught in adultery, and the worthy punishment of that or Exodus, Leviticus. Death, right?
In the law.
Yeah.
Death.
But yet Christ himself said, I don't condemn you. And then you're talking about, like, for those who don't even recognize that Christ, like that whole thing is just like, yeah, so it goes back to the whole argument about, like, killing someone. And is it ever right to actually say to someone, you should not exist?
Yeah, but I have, like I said, I have a pet peeve about people who are supposed to be Christians who are condemning the unbelievers of the world who've not yet had their eyes open to the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And who are we to judge another man's servant when he's decided not to give them the truth just yet? That's none of our business.
Yep. No, I completely agree. I think it's really. All right.
I mean, we're to pray for them and to pray for the peace of the land, but God, in His own good time, will choose. And we're to stand ready to witness to those who ask us, for God to use us, but we're not to condemn them. We don't have that power.
I completely agree. But then we get back into the whole realm of, but wait, if we choose that way, then the whole world will fall into a state of anarchy. It's upon us to dictate how the world is to be run.
Let's not go there. Because when we start getting into theocracy, knowing history and the history of theocracies, it's ugly.
It's really ugly.
Yeah, so let's not go there.
It's really ugly, and that's why, like, personally speaking, like when I hear like
because until Christ returns, theocracy isn't going to work.
Yeah. I've heard it where people had talked about bombing certain places in the Middle East and saying those places should be parking lots. I've heard it said that.
Yeah, I know you have.
It's like I've heard it said that like there are certain like people who are like savages on this earth. I've heard it like, and it's just like, who in the world are we to have those thoughts? Like, and to think that way. What I'm saying is, genuinely speaking, who in the world are we to think those things? And it's like when we recognize how much, going back to your comment, how Christ died for us and opened our eyes in that regard, it's like we are there to just be beacons of His light, saying there is a way that doesn't necessarily go by the human way. Even though Christ is more human than we'll ever be. But, than we'll ever be for now. So anyway.
So.
Right, exactly. You make things better. It tastes better. Anyway, like it's like, and he sprinkles you like so. Anyway. I did want no. I'll mention that next week. What was the reason I was it pertinent? Hold on, it was in Hebrews 8. Give me 1 second, and then I'll figure out if it's worth saying right before we end. No, I don't think it was. Okay. All right, because we're talking about like, we'll wait until next week for that one. That's something I think will be fun because we're talking about like those things of the old covenant that like have like no bearing on it in terms of the new covenant and stuff like that. I think it'll be interesting to dive into a few more concepts, like for example, like the restriction that Christians give on other Christians, like that you have to speak in tongues in order to be saved. Like the only sign that you are saved is the speaking of tongues, and it's like that's instantaneously restrictive.
No, that's not true, because that's a gift, and not everybody has the same gift.
Right.
Also, some people have this gift.
We talked about that.
Yeah.
Exactly, and I'm saying that there's more than just that as well. It's like no, you have to when you do certain things, you have to say it in exactly this way, and that's and the thing it's like as if God will incline His ear. It's like I don't.
That's mysticism.
That's exactly what I was getting at. It's like I was talking recently about like this concept of like it's like an incantation. And it's like there are incantations that I often hear. It's like I was talking to someone probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, and having to do with like the concept of a perceived sin that was being that was to be I guess you could say weeded out. Like that was like a concept, and it's like, well, when praying, did you say it in specifically this way? And it was like a certain wording, and I'm sitting here going, wait a second, that sounds like what they did in ancient Canaan when they would say certain phrases again and again or in a certain way in order to invite the God's ear, in order to bring that ear into the conversation. And it's like when it says quite clearly that God is always willing to listen to anyone who calls out.
In another vein, it would be vain repetition.
There is a huge debate on what vain repetition means. I used to think exactly the same way that you did as well, but I think there's actually, if you want, we can bring that up next week. I think that'd be really cool. But like vain repetition has, well, you're right, dead right. Sorry, like my mind.
No, vain repetition can mean many things. But vain repetition just means fruitless babbling over and over.
Right.
You know, it's like
for example, the concept of like saying a certain thing that you don't believe necessarily.
And just saying it.
Right. And it's like again and again and again, and it's like it's not reality.
We're having to say things in exactly the same way at exactly the same time. That's vain repetition.
That's like an extension of it.
Yeah.
But what I'm thinking of is like when people are like praying for certain things, and it's like, oh, I got one. Like praying them into existence. That's like a huge thing. Like that's like a very big New Age thought that has come in. And anyway, there's a difference between praying into existence instead of like being in tune with the Spirit and seeing what God wants, and then going along with that in prayer. That's like anyway, there's so much going into it. But
no, that's not a new belief. Praying into existence.
No, I'm talking about like the New Age concept of praying into existence.
Yeah, it's a New Age concept.
It's called. Be careful.
But it's a very ancient belief.
You're right. Well,
yeah. It's
not in. Yes, it is. It's like, no, you're right, because it's like there are certain cultures that did bring that in, because it's like you have to, like for example, like you repeat to yourself over and over again, I am beautiful, I am.
That's mystic.
Yeah, like, and it's like you repeat these things, and it's like, but you really don't believe them, but you try to force yourself to believe them. And it's like that. Anyway, that's like, and that goes into another concept as well. It's like saying to God, like forcing a certain for example, for me, I would often pray to God saying I love you, but I really didn't. It's like I didn't love him yet. I didn't know him like that yet. And it's like, but yeah, I hear, and it's not like it's so many. I hear saying it's like, no, you say it in a way that like you fake it until you make it, and it's like that. I'm sorry. You can't fake it with God. Although it's like I was trying to, anyway, that like trying to force myself into that loving relationship. It's like, but if there is no love there yet, you can't force it. And that I couldn't control falling in love with him. It's just like I told someone recently. I went out to lunch with someone recently, and I was like, hey, It's imagine like you were in imagine like you were in falling in love with your wife, but your wife wanted to make sure that she fell in love with you in a certain way, so she actually had it all planned out in terms of like what words were to be said in exactly the right order and exactly how it was to be done. And it's just like, I'm sure she would have fallen in love with you exactly the same way.
Can I share something?
Please do. And then we'll round it up.
Something really bad. Praying at the time, when I'm not really feeling very excited about what God is doing, and just asking Him to help me to love Him. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No.
You know what I mean?
No, that's the
But it's kind of like, help me to love you and trust you.
Oh, no, that's totally
at this point, I'm not at this point now, but at that point, at this point, I just don't know how. I don't.
I remember praying something similar, or praying for the willingness to submit, or praying for that. Like, it's like, I don't know how to submit. Show me. Like, that's a totally different paradigm. That's different than saying, I love you, 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 I love you. It's like you're not really loving. You're being slave-like. Like it's not. There's a disconnect. It's not. I mean, imagine Dad or you saying to Dad all the time, I love you, Eric, I love you.
He'd be like, shut up.
I love you. I love you. Anyway, that's I think because anyway. So what we're going to do is next week when we get back together, we're going to round up Hebrews because we have that whole section where it talks about faith. I'm not going to get into that, but I do want to start in 12 again, leading into the rest of it because it's the whole concept of that ending packs a punch. We did that small section in there saying therefore is the therefore statement. Therefore, we have gone to God through Christ in the assembly room. We are part of that assembly. Our names are written and having all of that coming together. And I did want to spend some time on that before we continue on with the rest of the epistles and then into the big epistle, the big conglomeration of epistles. Revelation. But anyway, this is fun. I am looking forward to taking a look at the other epistles before Revelation. We're almost there. So anyway, and we're talking about the concept of it. I will be their God and they will be my people. That was also referenced in the Hebrews. That's why I absolutely love the end of Revelation when it wasn't a quote. It's saying this is when God that He is our God and we are His people. And I can't wait till we get my favorite section of the Bible, hands down.
Or actually get there.
We're going to talk about. Okay, so
I'm not talking about reading it. I'm talking about living.
By the way, we will be done in the next 5 minutes, no matter what, because I know that sometimes. Okay, I just have to say, Revelation looked at, and I said this before, but I'm trying to hammer this home. Revelation, just because of Christ saying, was, is, and is to come. The whole book, everything about it, is about the things that were, are, and are to come, pushed together into one statement. And this is why it is, the revelation is that we see everything through God's eyes. That's what I love about it. It's I can't wait till we get into it. It's like you see the whole picture as close to us through God's eyes as we possibly can. And that's why I love that book. But anyway, so any comments before we end? I guess. So, let's go ahead. Father, thank you for being the one, the one above all, the one who loves us so much that you don't have to incline your ear when we say certain things. It's like, you know our hearts, and it is our hearts that allow your ear to be inclined toward us. Thank you for that. Thank you for always, like when our hearts are pure, that you turn your ear all the closer. That whole Hebrew phrase of inclining your ear. And may we also incline our ear, always, and listen to your voice and follow it. And not listen to human understanding, but follow you, trust you, have faith in you. For it is through faith, by faith, that so many have followed. When things didn't seem like, pretty much against them. I mean, look at Hebrews 11. There's a whole bunch going against it. But yet through faith, they followed. Through faith, like, we are saved. And so we just hold on to you. We cling to you. May we always cling to you. May you be with us throughout the next week. May these thoughts really start to mold within our minds. May we get closer to you throughout it all. And just be with us all as we continue on this journey together. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, recording off.